Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
I'm so happy to be joined today by the lovely Jan Shipman. Jan, along with her husband Chip, was mentored by Sid Banks from 1975 until 2009. Over the years, Jan has spent much of her time helping women in their roles in various settings, including prisons, drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs, corporations, non-profit organizations, community programs, and schools. Perhaps the most important area of impact has been her work with women in relation to their family life. Jan and Chip enjoy sharing their understanding with individuals, couples, and teams. They have seen countless people find happiness and flourishing relationships as their own wisdom emerges after being touched by the original books and recordings of Sid Banks. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Jan. It's so lovely to see you again. Seeing a lot of you lately.
Lovely to see you too. Yes, It has been wonderful.
Yeah, I was just saying your gorgeous warm fireplace behind you. So Chip was telling me the story about the mantle, the pieces on it, how that they're from your original home. Is that right?
Exactly. The house I grew up in and lived in for 20 years since I was born. So
yeah, that's amazing. It's a lovely story.
It is.
So I was sharing that I had the privilege of interviewing Chip a couple of weeks ago, and he was sharing his side of what it was like to meet Sid Banks for the first time and how it impacted his life. So I'd love to hear from you how you first came across Sydney and how it impacted your life.
Wonderful. Yes, as Chip mentioned, I came home one day from after I had met Sid, and that was the beginning of his story. But what happened was we're living on a little island not far from Salt Spring Island, where we live now, and where Sid was living all those years ago. And it was 1975, and we were looking after some our friends' kids while they came over to Salt Spring to visit Sid and his wife at the time. And we had heard about Sid, but we weren't really interested because we were very serious searchers. We were into anything that came down the pike, that was new and interesting or ancient. but it was a serious search. Mm-hmm. So we thought that spirituality was something that you had to really work at. It was serious, and so we just, when we saw some friends of ours who, had listened to this man named Sid Banks, who was, had just had this recent experience apparently. And we, all of a sudden, they were just too happy-go-lucky in our eyes. Mm-hmm. Friends of ours who used to love just having serious discussions about politics and the state of the world. And, this was the kind of the milieu that we were living in at the time. People were really questioning society's norms and everything. And so that was, to me, for both of us, we just kind of wrote off this person named Sid Banks, because what could he know? And he wasn't from India or Tibet, and he wasn't wearing robes that we knew of. So then, by fate, we were looking after our friends' kids over the weekend, and one of the kids got an injury that needed to be get stitches for. And so one of us had to take the child over to Salt Spring, which was the nearest island where there was a hospital that was open on the weekends, because our little island was so tiny. Mm-hmm. And it was a weekend. So one of us had to bring the child over to Salt Spring, where the parents were also. And so the parents met me at the dock after I got over there on the water taxi, and then they took care of the daughter who got their stitches at the hospital, and then they were heading back to where they were visiting already, was Sid's house. And I can still feel the feeling of turning into that driveway, and this long winding driveway through trees down towards the beach. And I saw this little cottage just nestled among the trees there, and I had a feeling coming over me already driving down that driveway, as if something was so familiar, as if I'd been there in a dream or something. It was quite a magical feeling.
Wow.
And at that time, I want to add, Chip and I, and you probably heard this from Chip already, that our marriage was in a really bad state because of our seriousness in our search for spirituality. We had become serious in every part of our life. And so Chip had started to remember things from his past that he'd let go of previously, and he'd started to remember the unhappiness of his childhood home, and so then I took on that sadness, and I felt like how could I be happy when Chip was suffering? And so I just joined him in, feeling down, and then along with that came a sense of really insecurity about, when I was around other people, and then anxiety, worrying about the future, and also a feeling of just general paranoia about the world, and about being out in public or with other people, and just feeling I was questioning myself as a human being, like, was I really authentic in my feelings about people? Did I have an agenda? So I started analyzing myself.
Yeah.
And so that was the state I was in. I had become a pretty much hopeless, insecure, very unhappy person. And when I walked into that room at Sid's, when his wife greeted me at the door, and our friends introduced me to them, and I walked into the living room, and there was this man sitting on the sofa, and even though I'd never seen a picture of Sid, and I had met him, I just knew that had to be Sidney Banks. And he looked over when I was introduced, and there was just the most beautiful expression in his eyes, so gentle and so loving and calm. And I was invited to sit down and visit. They had a few friends over. Several couples were visiting them that day, and in their living room. And so I was just so shy in those days, and so I sat down. I remember I just sat on the carpet because everybody was sitting on sofas, and I'm sure they offered me a place to sit on a chair or a sofa, but I just, kind of hurried over to the corner and sat on the floor, on the carpet. And so then Sid was talking, just socially, and people were chit-chatting, but then all of a sudden the room got really quiet, and Sid started to talk in a different way. His voice got really slowed down, and he just started talking as if anybody's heard Sid talk in his recordings, like just calmly stating one spiritual truth after another. Wow. And as I sat there, because I had always been interested in wisdom, and the wisdom of the ages, like different wise people through history, whether it was through religion or literature or philosophy, I had always felt there was like a thread of truth running through all the great teachers. And as I sat there and listened to Sid, every single statement he said was totally in sync with what I'd always believed to be the wisdom of the ages. It was beautiful, really deep spiritual facts. And each statement just settled on me, and I was just feeling in agreement. I was feeling that, yeah, that's true. And so that just calmed me down. And having walked into that room with a busy mind, full of analyzing and worry, everything, that just started to dissipate. And this calm, beautiful feeling started to come in. And then Sid looked over at me, and he said, if everybody in this room and everybody in the world could see how beautiful they are inside, and if they could see who they really are, and that there's this whole other part of them that they don't even know about, if they could see that, they'd have all the happiness they could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And something in the way he said that was so accessible to me. Like I really let that sink in instead of say, oh no, he must mean everybody else but
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
I heard it from somewhere deep inside, and that just made me feel just so calm and free of all my baggage, basically.
Yeah.
And as I sat and listened to him and he kept talking, I something else hit me, was that if all the wise people were always trying to tell us not to listen to them, but to hear that truth can only be heard from within ourselves, I felt as if it was the first time I really heard what that meant, because I was looking at Sid and it occurred to me, it looks like the wisdom is coming from him because he's talking, but if the wise were telling the truth as it really is, it has to be coming from me. It looks like it's the wisdom's coming from him, but the wisdom is coming from me. And in that moment, I didn't just believe that, I knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt this sense that, of course, the wisdom's been with me since forever, and it will be with me forever.
Yeah.
And that was a powerful experience.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to know it for yourself to recognize it when it's being spoken by another.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Del. And I really felt that in my core. Like I just, it wasn't like a belief or a
Mm-hmm.
wish or I wish that could be true. It was just like,
Yeah.
of course. And
Isn't
so
that beautiful?
then Sid started to talk. He talked a little bit longer in that really spiritual way, and then he kind of changed gears and he looked around the room and there were several couples, as I mentioned, and he said, one thing that you'll find really helpful in life, if you could try this, is that if you find yourself in an argument with someone or a debate, and you feel like you're trying to win the debate and you're defending yourself, and if you start to get a negative feeling, a really helpful thing to do in life would be to just be able to just let go of that feeling of wanting to defend your point of view, and let go of your anger, if there's anger involved, and just do whatever you have to do to disengage from the argument or discussion or whatever. And I remember thinking that, well, that wouldn't be a good idea for me, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to defend my point of view with Chip because I'm right. So part of me just kind of caught me off guard.
Mm-hmm.
However, I quickly came back to this sense of there's truth being spoken here. So I think I'm going to give that a try. I think I should have a look at that
Mm-hmm.
possibility that I could do that. And then I just let it go, and I just enjoyed, being in the room. And then a little while later, things wound down and people were leaving, and we all kind of left at the same time. And I remember walking out of the kitchen and just taking one last look over at Sid, and he caught my eye, and I just had this strong feeling that this wasn't the last time I would see him.
Yeah. That's
And
so
then I,
beautiful. I know that when you went home, Chip said that it was a completely different Jan than he'd experienced before. So, I'm just wondering, that seems, what you just shared, what you got in that first meeting is so profound. I mean, those two things right there. One, that to know that how beautiful we all are and to really know it. And the other one, to just disengage or not, get into the ego of having to be right. I mean, those two things alone are life-changing. And clearly, because they changed your life.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that feeling or the knowing that we have wisdom, inside us. We have everything we need
Yeah.
inside us.
Yeah.
And I want to add the little bridge between my story and Chip's story
Yes.
is when I did get home that day, and there was a ferry ride involved. I mean, our friends drove me to the ferry. We got on the ferry in their car, and I don't remember any of that.
Wow.
However, I remember when they dropped me off at our house, and they just dropped me off in the driveway, and I started walking towards our house, and I was walking up towards our back door, and I knew that Chip was on the other side of the door with our little boy who was about 3 at the time. And I just was looking at the door and just picturing when we opened the door that I would be able to tell Chip what had happened and that he would be so thrilled.
And I
That's
think
the bridge between our two stories.
I know, that's so funny. Yeah, we heard Chip's resistance for a while there and what it was like for him. So again, so what was it like for you that he wasn't sort of open to hearing what had happened? What was that experience like for you?
I felt so immersed in this new feeling that I was living in. That was my feeling. It had nothing to do, like one of the insights that I had too was that I realized I've been thinking that there was something out there in the world or some person or event that can cause me to be happy or unhappy. But when I heard Sid say that all the happiness is already within us, then when I was with Chip, I was living in a different world. I was living in a world where things on the outside weren't affecting my feelings in the same way they were. They might a little bit, but if my feelings got affected and I got my feelings hurt or I got upset or whatever, it would quickly look to me like, oh, I used to think this was Chip's fault or the circumstances, but this is me. I'm only happy because I'm choosing to be unhappy, or I'm letting things bother me. And so I even though maybe I couldn't always pull out of it right away, I could see that it wasn't coming from out there.
Yeah.
Unhappiness or hurt or anything was not coming from outside of me. And that was huge.
Yeah, it is. That's another one of those like life-changing moments. And like you said, I love it. It's not that we don't sometimes get sucked into it a little bit, but there's always that observer that knows that that's not the truth and that it's momentary and it's going to pass and we're going to pop out of it again. But just knowing that we are the creators of our own experience.
Yes.
That what we're feeling is via our thinking, not the other person, not the other event, even though it does seem like it sometimes. But
Oh, definitely.
yeah, that's
And
incredible.
and it can still do that to me. Yesterday, I had that. There were a few things that had happened. Like there was a death in my family, and
I'm sorry.
from one of my siblings lost a child and an older child, but still it was.
Yeah.
And so I was having like this overall kind of not feeling not quite well or myself, and I was just telling Chip this morning it was so strong, and I there were some things that I was about to complain about yesterday because I was just added to the general feeling of sadness was like I was feeling kind of grumpy. And I was just saying to Chip that like last night we went out for dinner, and part of me all the way there in the car and then all through the dinner, it was just on the tip of my tongue to just complain about something or just bring things up that were gonna make him feel bad, and that would just spiral downward. And I just kept being so grateful. At the same time, I was feeling wanting to complain and dragging other people into my misery. I was feeling this feeling of gratefulness that I knew I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And that I could actually not do that.
Yeah.
If I had complained and gotten grouchy, that would have been okay, but that would have been just human. But there was something in me that managed to just keep a nice feeling.
Sure.
And
Just knowing that you have
yeah,
that choice. I mean, sometimes it feels like we don't have the choice. We're so gripped in
right,
our emotion. But when we do just sort of take a moment, sit back, and as you say, you recognize that temptation to share the pain that you're in or the hurt and upset you're in and have somebody join you there. But just that ability to just say, hold on a minute, do I want to make this choice or not? Because there is a choice whether you go down that rabbit hole or not.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
And as I said, sometimes I don't, have the ability, or I don't use my ability, and I will bite, when my
oh,
ego or my
yeah,
personal self is compelling me to just, I just got to say this one thing, and so that's part of the life too.
it
But
is. Exactly.
yeah, but to know that we have this beautiful gift of understanding that keeps going deeper is amazing.
And even if you do bite, which I do too, obviously, but but again, it's the not, because sometimes, we can be reactive, and if we don't have this understanding, then we'll beat ourselves up for being reactive rather than stopping it right there and just saying that's just part of the human condition. We sometimes we forget. Sometimes we're in
Right.
a low mood and we are reactive. But to not compound on top of that more suffering and beating ourselves up for it, just be like, oh, I just like got hijacked by my humanness and
Exactly.
I'm back to knowing who I am now. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So I'm fascinated to know about the work that you did with Sid in those early days. I mean, the prison systems, the work with women that you do in their families. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that was the most beautiful gift to me in all our work, was to find ourselves in a setting where women were just at the lowest point in their life, and just and yet so kind to us, because we ended up working in the prison through our corporate work, led to one of our corporate clients um, funding a not for us, doing a lot of work for not for profits, because he did a lot of funding for charities and not for profits. And so among all the not for profits, and there were many of every description, working with kids, homeless, everything, one of them was a transition house for women. And that was the link for us, this one woman who ended up reoffending, which we felt terrible about when we heard about it. But in a way, it was so providential, because she reoffended and contacted Sid from prison and asked for books, because she'd been reading his books in the transition house when she was there. That led us to this connection to work in the women's prison. And when we first got there, the way that we were received by these women was so heartwarming. They just when we went to our first class, it was in a Florida prison, so it was super hot and humid, and um, I just remember walking up, and these women were waiting outside the classroom, because a lot of it was outdoors, and then you would walk into the buildings. And so they were waiting outside, and the one woman that we did know, who we had worked with in the transition house, she was there, and just a few women with her. And when we walked up, because we didn't know what it would feel like to walk into the prison, and in that setting and everything, there was just these, I don't know how to explain it. They were also loving and welcoming. And it wasn't the whole class. There were just maybe 4 women standing with the woman that we, been invited in by. And that was the start. Like, it was just this feeling of, here's these beautiful souls. Not here's these people who've done bad things. They're just beautiful souls. And then when we went into the classroom, and there were other women that were in the group as well, and some of them were kind of skeptical, because right away we shared our story, what had happened to us, and I think some of them, maybe three or four thought we were a little bit Pollyanna, and they were saying, "Well, you don't really know what it's like in here."
Yeah.
And I'm just going to close something that came up on my screen here. So what we did was we just told them, honestly, that we didn't know what it was like to be in prison. We had never been in prison, and that we understood that it must be hard to have to be confined and have people taught to you in whatever way they were being taught to, but that if they would listen to us and just give us a chance, that they would be amazed at the possibilities of what could come from them, realizing or just listening about the fact that inside them was something beautiful, just like I had heard from Sid, and that they weren't broken, and that we didn't want to know anything about their past. We weren't interested. We just saw them as souls, just like ourselves. And so, but the part where we said, just be open to see what happens. And so about, I think maybe less than a year later, might have been a year later, in that same prison, we ended up doing more and more groups. Like we would do one group for 8 weeks, and then we'd go on to the next group. We'd covered so many groups that all these women in the prison were changing so much that we were invited to train the staff in the principles. And so when we trained the staff, then the warden decided to put out a memo about how the staff should be talking to these women and treating them. And so all of a sudden, all these women are seeing that they're being treated differently. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing in the very beginning that they were concerned about. Well, how, if I listen to you, I'll still be in this prison and I'll still be treated badly. Mm-hmm. And now they had the proof that the world, not only will you change how you feel, but the world can actually change about you.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. That's really, I mean, and that's, I mean, when you share on that level and you impact, as you say, not even, I'm thinking about the people that are incarcerated, but then the people, the wardens and the people, the prison officers, and then the ripple out effect of their families. And then when these women, get out and probably don't reoffend. I mean, most probably don't, because they have another way of life and opened up to them. So,
exactly.
Unfortunately, we are sort of coming up on our time. It goes so fast, but I wanted to
talk. My goodness.
I know. Tell me some of the projects that you've got coming up, because I know you work with your husband, Chip, and you do some amazing things. So tell us a little bit about what's coming up and how people can find you.
Well, we will be in England again for the conference in London in June. I think it's June 7th to June 9th. Mm-hmm. And our website is vantageconsult.com, and we kind of talks about our services. We mostly, if we're not traveling and doing a conference, we're here on Salt Spring doing Skype calls, or sometimes people come to Salt Spring and do individual retreats. And so, that we haven't traveled as much as we did in our younger days, but we're always available to work online, and so.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I know Chip was telling me that you may be doing, I don't know if you have the dates yet though, but a workshop in, is it the Canary Islands?
Well, we're not sure this year whether we're going back to the Canary Islands. We've done that for the last 5 years. We've done a retreat either in Lanzarote or Tenerife, which was absolutely amazing. And so I think this time it may be later in the fall that we'll be doing that. And but it hasn't really been set up yet, so we're not sure about that one.
Okay, well, I look forward to that one if you do it.
Oh, really?
It sounds wonderful.
Well, it is. It's quite a beautiful setting. we never dreamed in all our, dreams, wildest dreams, that we'd end up doing all these things in our life, traveling all over the world and
Yes, being guided by
meeting lovely people like you, Del.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I can't thank you enough. And I know I'll see you in London and hopefully in Salt Spring too. So
Wonderful.
Okay, all right.
Wonderful.
Well, have a
So
wonderful.
lovely. Thank you, and thanks
Thank
to
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.